It's Thursday, 20th of November, 2025. Welcome back to your news update on Blip Brief. Small, but almost everything updated every weekday.
So we are diving straight into what might be one of the most confusing economic paradoxes we've seen from a major economy this year.
We're talking about India.
We are. Specifically, this shockingly low inflation data, which is creating, well, an almost impossible tightrope walk for the Reserve Bank of India.
Impossible is probably the right word, because when you just look at the headline number, the Consumer Price Index for October, it paints a picture of an economy that desperately needs a shot of stimulus. What's the number?
The latest combined CPI reading is a provisional record low, just 0.25% year on year.
0.25.
Yeah, and that's a massive drop in just 1 month, a fall of 119 basis points from September. I mean, inflation has, for all intents and purposes, just evaporated, or so it seems.
And to be clear, we're talking about inflation nearly flatlining here. This is almost entirely driven by what's happening on, dinner tables across the country, right?
Yeah, precisely. The pressure is localized, but incredibly powerful. The Consumer Food Price Index, the CFPI, is in deep deflation, falling to Vatican 5.02%.
Wow.
That's the lowest figure ever recorded for this CPI series. It's a spectacular statistical collapse.
Okay, so let's unpack the why behind that, because this isn't just prices naturally coming down. What's causing such an extreme drop?
It's a mix of policy intervention and, frankly, some statistical trickery. You've got two main drivers here. First, favorable base effects.
Right.
So when you compare October 2025 prices to October 2024, last year's prices were really high. So this year's stable prices look dramatically lower in percentage terms.
So it's an artificially inflated drop. And what's the second, more policy-driven reason?
That's the full month impact of those aggressive GST rate cuts, especially on mass consumption food items. And the data shows just how extreme it's been. Vegetable inflation dropped by over 27.57%.
27%.
And Poll's inflation fell by 16.15%. When your basic staples fall that hard, the whole average CPI just collapses.
Which brings us to the policy tangle. The RBI has an inflation target range of 2% and 6%. At 0.25%, the pressure on them to cut rates must be immense.
It's deafening. Economists are lining up, pretty much demanding the Monetary Policy Committee cut the repo rate by at least 25 basis points in December. The central bank is under huge pressure to use its tools to shield the economy from, well, that hostile external environment.
Specifically, the U.S. trade tariffs.
Exactly.
But this is where the real risk comes in. If the RBI cuts rates based on this statistical anomaly, they could be making a huge mistake. The underlying costs haven't really gone away.
That is the critical nuance you have to grasp here. That 0.25% figure is highly deceptive. Core inflation is still sticky.
So non-food, non-fuel categories.
They're nowhere near deflation. Look at housing inflation in urban areas. It's still up at 2.96%.
Yeah.
And crucially, the public's perception of inflation, according to the RBI's own surveys, was at 7.4% in September.
So the RBI is facing a public that feels costs are soaring, while the official data says inflation is basically zero. If you cut rates when rent and transport are still rising, you risk just flooding the system with liquidity.
You do. You risk eroding your credibility. Cutting rates now could just fuel asset bubbles and not actually help with the structural costs businesses are facing. The evidence really suggests this is a temporary policy-induced blip.
A fascinating tightrope walk, indeed.
It truly is.
Okay, so moving from that macro tightrope to the equity markets. Investors, well, they seemed willing to ignore that complexity yesterday. Domestic markets closed higher on Wednesday.
They did, and it was largely fueled by a renewed sense of optimism around those potential India-U.S. trade deal talks.
And that optimism flowed directly into the tech sector, didn't it?
It did. The IT names, which are heavyweights on the indices, really drove most of the gains. We saw HCL Technologies jump by 4.28%. Infosys was up 3.79% after their buyback news, and TCS posted a solid gain of 1.93%.
Why tech specifically? Is it just a sentiment play?
It's a bit more strategic than that. First, yes, the trade talk optimism is key for the outsourcing sector. But second, the rupee has depreciated slightly, which is a tailwind for them, It boosts their export earnings. So IT is seen as a safe, resilient bet right now.
The other side of that coin was the auto space. That showed real weakness. Tata Motors was down 2.87%. Maruti Suzuki fell 1.23%. What's that telling us?
It suggests that while there's high-level trade hope, the domestic consumption story is still fragile. Auto sales are a key barometer for consumer confidence, and weakness here tells you that high input costs and hesitant demand are still a big problem.
On the corporate finance side, this IPO supercycle, it just keeps going. Investment banks must be having an incredible year.
They are. It's been historic. Companies have raised over 1.5 lakh crore this year, which means just blockbuster fee income for the deal makers. But it does raise a question for you as an investor. Are these valuations sustainable?
That's the challenge. And we're seeing the banks themselves trying to keep the momentum going with aggressive buy calls. What are they forecasting?
They're projecting some pretty significant near-term gains. We're seeing buy calls on LG Electronics, Deepak Fertilizers, Arvind, and Tata Capital, with predicted returns anywhere from 15% to 38%. It definitely signals a heated environment.
And a major corporate deal to note from the Adani Group.
Yes, the Adani Group sold an additional 13% stake in AWL Agribusiness to a subsidiary of Wilmar International. It's a classic move to optimize their portfolio and strengthen that strategic partnership.
So if we connect all this back to the macro pressures, that RBI predicament, it feels like domestic policy is now almost secondary to these external geopolitical shocks.
That is the explicit link we need to make. The pressure on the RBI is amplified by the massive economic damage from the U.S. administration. I mean, after the India-Pakistan conflict in May, the U.S. slapped a punitive 50% tariff on Indian imports.
50%. I mean, that's not a negotiation. That's economic warfare.
It's a major shock designed to coerce. And it came at the same time Washington did this dramatic pivot in South Asia. The U.S. deepened its ties with Pakistan, granting Islamabad a highly preferential 19% tariff rate.
So a penalty for India and a reward for Pakistan.
And it is the lowest tariff rate in the entire region. The message couldn't be clearer.
And how quickly did that impact the trade flows?
Almost immediately. A recent U.S. trade report showed its overall deficit narrowed in August, and the reason cited was a plunge in imports right after these tariffs kicked in. So it's working. It's restricting India's market access, which forces the RBI's hand.
Shifting to global commodities, oil prices took a noticeable dip yesterday.
They fell sharply, down by about 2.5% on Wednesday. The driver was geopolitics again, but this time leaning toward resolution. Reports emerged of a potential U.S. proposal to broker an end to the Russia-Ukraine war.
And even the slim prospect of that was enough to push prices down.
It was. Any hint of easing global supply concerns will do that.
And final on geopolitics, the information warfare front is getting, well, very sophisticated. We're getting more clarity on China's role in trying to discredit India's military tech.
This is truly modern conflict. A U.S. Congress report has detailed an elaborate disinformation campaign run by China. They used fake news and AI-generated images.
To do what?
To discredit the Rafale fighter jet, specifically after India used it in Operation Sindoor against terror groups based in Pakistan.
So after the jet performs well in the real world, China uses AI to create fake content to sow doubt about its effectiveness.
Exactly. It shows how fast these things are scrutinized now, not just by militaries, but through massive digital influence operations designed to erode confidence.
Okay, let's bring it back home and look at the institutional checks and balances defining India's future, starting with a huge statement from the Supreme Court.
A very powerful statement on judicial independence. The court delivered a decisive ruling, striking down multiple provisions of the Tribunals Reforms Act of 2021. It was a clear rebuke of what it saw as executive overreach.
And it struck down things like the minimum entry age of 50 and the short 4-year tenure for member.
Right. The court essentially said Parliament was trying to bypass its authority with what it called an impermissible legislative override. One justice even called the act old wine in a new bottle.
So what's the long-term fix here? What did the court mandate to stop this constant back and forth?
They mandated the creation of a National Tribunals Commission, an NTC, within 4 months. This NTC is designed to be a permanent structural safeguard against executive control over these appointments. It's a monumental shift.
At the same time, the court also gave a massive boost to regulatory certainty for the infrastructure sector.
That's right. The SEC recalled an earlier ruling from May that had struck down the practice of granting environmental clearances ex post facto, so after the fact.
Which for major infrastructure projects is a huge deal.
It is, because these large projects often face delays.
Oh.
By recalling the ruling, the court is providing crucial certainty and really prioritizing economic momentum over, you can argue, strict procedural rules.
Switching to the political battlefield, things are heating up in Assam ahead of the 2026 assembly polls.
Very intense starring. The Election Commission has ordered a special revision of electoral rolls with the stated aim of weeding out illegal voters.
Which the opposition finds highly suspicious, right?
Absolutely. They allege this is just a move to manipulate voter demographics, especially after the delimitation process already reduced Muslim-dominated assembly seats from 30 down to 22. So that's the defining political narrative there.
And on internal security, a major arrest to note.
The NIA arrested the alleged gangster Anmol Bishnoi after he was deported from the U.S. It's part of a huge terror gangster conspiracy case and just highlights how long-lasting and transnational these crime networks really are.
And finally, a political milestone in Bihar.
Nitish Kumar is set to take charge as Chief Minister of Bihar today for the 10th time. I mean, that milestone just perfectly encapsulates the power of regional leaders and the complex, shifting dynamics of coalition politics in India.
We'll finish today's deep dive looking at India's strategic push to become a global tech and space superpower, a sort of triple threat in capacity, capability, and soft power.
The space sector is going through this profound commercial pivot. ISRO's primary directive is aggressive, to say the least, to triple India's annual spacecraft production capacity in the next 3 years.
So moving from a research agency to a global satellite factory.
That's the goal.
Yep.
And the proof that it's working is imminent. We have the upcoming launch of the first PSLV rocket that was entirely manufactured by Indian industry. That's a huge milestone.
So the private sector is ready to take over.
It confirms it, and this frees up ISRO to focus on next-gen research, on deep space missions,
And beyond the hardware, India's digital public infrastructure, or DPI, is being positioned as the next big tech export. For anyone not familiar, what exactly is DPI?
Think of it as India offering the world the digital plumbing, the identity systems, the payment rails that powered its own digital revolution. And crucially, it's non-proprietary and low-cost. We're talking open-source systems.
So it's an alternative to relying on, say, proprietary ecosystems from U.S. or Chinese tech giants?
Exactly that. It's about technological sovereignty for the global south. India has already signed agreements with over 10 nations, Trinidad and Tobago, Kenya, Armenia, to help them build out their own digital frameworks. It's a very powerful form of digital diplomacy.
And just before you go, a quick note, this deep dive commentary was put together using advanced AI. We always strive for accuracy, but please do cross-verify any crucial information yourself. Your informed decisions are what matter most.